Today, we're talking about how to navigate redundancy. Now, for a long time, an actuarial career meant a job for life, but in recent years, there's been an increasing number of actuaries finding themselves facing redundancy. There's a few reasons behind this: consolidation of insurance markets, recent Big Four consulting scandals, and other market forces that are contributing to this. And so, this is leading to the shrinkage of actuarial teams, and actuaries are wondering what's next. And in fact, over the last year in my coaching business, facing redundancy and how to navigate redundancy is probably one of the most common topics that people want to discuss in coaching. So, to explore this a little bit further, joining us for this discussion today is Kevin Cattaway. Kevin's a seasoned data and analytics leader, having worked in many different actuarial teams and having run a few actuarial departments over his career. He's also recently navigated redundancy and come out the other side. So, Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Hi, great to join you. Redundancy. What can I say? Um, it's certainly not what you're expecting, but it's definitely navigatable, and it's nothing to be feared. I have a number of friends who sort of point to the fact that, on average, people get made in professional roles get made redundant 3 times in their careers.
Three
Maybe,
times. Wow.
yeah, and maybe not the norm in the actuarial world, because
Mm.
in the old days it was a job for life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is definitely something that I've seen more of and heard more about from friends, former colleagues, and
Mm.
current colleagues
Mm.
um, in the actuarial space.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about your experience and what you've learned and the tips that you've got for other actuaries facing redundancy today. But Kevin, before we get into that, I want to ask you the question I ask all my guests, and it's this: how do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
I think I use them by trying to be holistic in whatever I'm doing. So if I'm looking to solve a business problem, I try and do that holistically, taking into account, the financial, non-financial aspects of the issue at hand. So yeah, that would probably be how I do it. Try to do it in a as simple as possible form as well. Quite often, I see people come up with some really, really complex solutions for really simple problems.
Mm.
That doesn't always help the business. So I try to, use my inquisitiveness to find the simplest way of doing things in the most plain and communicate in the most plain English way. Not everyone's at the same level in terms of communication and knowledge and understanding. So if you can communicate things in a really simplistic way or at the right level,
Mm.
is the important thing, I think, with any solution, but keeping it as simple as possible. I think everyone's probably heard of the KISS principle. The irony is the gentleman who came up with the KISS principle was a aeronautical engineer who ran the skunk works. And so, yeah, for them, keeping it simple was often quite complicated.
I didn't know that. I do like the KISS principle, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, great superpowers, Kevin. So holistic but simple, and making sure you're communicating at the right level so your message lands. So important, especially for us with complex actuarial work that we're doing. So very good. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience of navigating redundancy?
Yeah, look, it's one of those things that does come out of the blue. So I think the best way to handle it is to, I say, take it on the chin. I know some people do get quite upset when they find out.
Mm.
Um, Try and keep your emotions in check. You can, for lack of a better way of put it, mourn, be upset in private. It's
Mm.
probably the best thing to do it in front of everyone. Um, the reality is that communication piece is hard, especially hard for the person being made redundant. But it's also not something that's overly pleasant for the people doing it.
Mm.
So, in my last redundancy, I was communicated the message. There was somebody from HR, my direct general manager, and a senior executive. But I managed to get a chuckle out of all of them. So,
Okay.
I it's about being professional at the end of the day, and understanding it's not a personal thing. Quite often, as you said, consolidation in markets in terms of the organisations and whatnot. The rise of technology
Yeah.
It's about the organisation being able to move forward. And whilst that's not always great for the individual, and I know that feeling, it's something, demonstrating that understanding to the individuals who have to deliver that message is important as well. It's not about individuals. It's about the organisation being able to move forward. So just keeping that in mind if you ever do find yourself in that position. Um, I guess other things to sort of be aware of: understand your legal rights. So understand, and most large organisations and mature organisations, they'll work to the letter of the law, but understand what your rights are. Understand what your benefits are in terms of redundancy. And look, a lot of organisations do go well above and beyond what's actually required from compared to sort of the federal legislation. So, again, they want you to succeed. Really mature organisations, they'll come out and they'll set you up to succeed in getting into a new role. So I was lucky in my previous role when I was made redundant. They set me up with a coach to assist me to help find another role,
Mm-hmm.
and that was on an ongoing basis for quite a while. And they gave me access to a lot of tools. And whilst it's a momentary time when you find out the news, they gave me a lot of time, and most mature organisations will give you plenty of time to absorb it, go through all the paperwork, understand all the paperwork. There can be some backwards and forwards around if if there's NDAs involved, additional ones that might need to be signed. So I was lucky enough. I have a great mate who's a lawyer. And he was like, "Oh, mate, just give it to me. I'll have a quick look at it for you and whatnot." So,
That's
but not
handy.
everyone has that. But being able to find a trusted person, because I'm certainly not a legal expert. So, if you do need to get agreements reviewed, find someone you trust. There are specialist firms out there. And it really is dependent on your situation and your level of seniority.
Mm.
And, understanding your gardening leave, what's allowed, what's not allowed. In my role, I had a 3-month notice period, and that was reciprocal. So I sort of helped out till 30 June, just there to help out, and then spent the rest of the time in gardening leave. But understand all of that. Understand what that means for yourself. Make sure you understand if there are any NDAs involved. Just understand what they mean in terms of going into another role. Some people get very lucky and can move straight into another role. Other people, it does take a bit of time. So it's really about understanding the process, understanding your rights and your responsibilities. Obviously, for a lot of actuaries, they do sit in quite senior roles in organisations, both in the actuarial space and non-actuarial space, especially in financial services. So understanding your role in the process and the responsibilities that you have. But it is okay, when you're not in front of everyone. You can have those moments where you can sort of forget your P's and Q's, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And that is important. Have people who you can talk to. I'm very lucky. I've got a lot of friends, former colleagues, who have been in similar situations, who have worked in the actuarial space, who provided a lot of advice, including giving me a bit of a kick up the arse in their own way. Excuse my language. But they're fantastic. Having a network is also really important. People who you can talk to about it, because it does hurt. It does feel personal, but you have to remember it's not personal.
So giving yourself time to process the emotional response, because it isn't an emotional response if you've been in this job and then it's been taken away from you.
Yeah,
You'd be like, why me? And why now? And what am I going to do? There'd be a whole host of emotions going on when
yeah,
you're faced with that.
yeah. And you do look back retrospectively and think, what could I have done better? And
Mm.
you know, hindsight is a beautiful thing. But yeah, it can be a really harsh mistress, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Mm.
You beat yourself up over things and think, oh, could I have done this better? Could I have communicated better with, this person, in the C-suite or on the board, or senior manager over here in the business? But at the end of the day, for the most part, it's probably not related to those things.
Yeah, yeah. But you could tie yourself in knots worrying about those things
Yep.
or beating yourself up about those things, as you said. So finding a way to kind of manage that professionally, and then process that,
Yeah.
and then get ready for your next role. So, Kevin, what was your experience of looking for a new role like?
Look, it was tough. The market was in a quite unusual place. There had been in the analytics space a lot of layoffs, redundancies. There'd also been a lot of contractors who had been made, well, not redundant, but their contracts had ceased.
Not
So
renewed.
that was across the financial services industry. I know some of the larger financial services businesses had sort of put on hold hiring. They'd stopped a lot of projects, and that makes it very challenging because you're competing against a lot of other people. The
Mm.
actuarial market wasn't great at the time. I reached out to a number of people I know who recruit specially in the actuarial market, and they fantastic. But the market wasn't great. To make things sort of exacerbated a little bit, in the time that I'd sort of been in, sort of had to look for a job, and I hadn't actually actively looked for a job for quite a while, sort of been in the market on a regular basis.
Mm.
The rise of, uh, I'll call them AI powered systems for HR to go through and sort through all the CVs.
Hmm.
So there's a variety of technologies, ATS systems or AT systems, applicant tracking. They'll actually do the first cut. And
Right.
what I found was, whilst they're not necessarily super sophisticated, some are, some aren't, but they can rule you out over very small things. And
Mm.
because there were a lot of people in the market, they were looking for people who matched exactly,
Right.
not necessarily taking into account soft skills or other things. Um, and that makes it a lot more challenging. And when you're competing against, so that's sort of with the direct market directly to companies. When you're going through a recruiter, I've got some friends who work in the recruitment space, and they sort of pointed out to me they were seeing an increased volume in terms of number of applicants per job. There's also technologies out there that allow people, they don't actually have to do anything. They can set up, it's like a bot. It'll just apply for roles based on your CV, I believe.
Right.
Never tried one. Um, but I was talking to one recruiter, not somebody I knew. He came back to me after he'd actually filled the role, and he said, "Look, I just want to apologise. We got 400 applicants for a head of data and analytics role."
Wow.
And he goes, "Of the 400, 380 probably shouldn't have applied. The 20 that were there, the C-suite um, line manager basically only wanted to see the top three." He goes, "I probably would have put you in the top five." And that was more because I didn't have domain experience, so non-financial services. So you're battling a whole lot of things. So I think one of the things you've got to think about is, where do you want to work next? So for a lot of people who have lifetime insurance or lifetime banking or lifetime super or wealth, have a think about where you want to work. Do you want to continue in those traditional roles? Now, depending on what your last role was, that could be a hard yes, that could be a hard no. I've had friends who are so close to retirement, they've sort of taken the opportunity to sit back and go, you know what, I'm just going to retire. They're the lucky ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, the reality is you need to work out what you want to do next. Do you want to stick with the traditional side of things? Do you want to go into something a little bit different? I think with the rise of sort of mainstream, we'll call it analytics, AI, machine learning, data science, whatever people like to call it these days,
Hmm.
there are a lot more options for people with actuarial backgrounds
Okay.
because the reality is the actuarial qualifications give you the ability to think. They also give you the ability to understand there's more to being a good actuary or a good analyst than just building good models.
Mm.
That you have to understand the regulatory frameworks. You have, was it peer for the GI people? Was it CPS 320? Things like that. Being compliant, PS 300. You've got to be compliant with all of those things. So you have a better understanding of those, having worked in non-actuarial analytic teams and run them. That's probably one of the bigger challenges I find for the analytics people. They go through university, they do data science courses, but you don't learn about any of that.
Right. So you've got the
So
pure answer or the data science. You can use the tools,
yeah,
and you can come up with a theoretically correct answer, but not necessarily with the same context.
context as well. It's not necessarily commercially viable.
Right.
So, I remember my early days working in valuations and tech pricing, and it's pricing valuations is, you have to adhere very closely to the regulations, and they're quite specific. Pricing, you can build the most beautiful and elegant pricing algorithm, and then you've got a wonky old rating engine that can only do so much, and you have to shoehorn it in. So
Right.
you learn very quickly between, okay, the beautiful, elegant model and then what you have to implement.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
that
what those
commercial,
constraints are.
yeah. And to be honest, I was super lucky when I joined pricing back in the days of AMP General Insurance. So goes back a while. I worked with some absolutely amazing actuaries. And, the level of commerciality that existed there was fantastic. The
Mm.
guys were, we were lucky we got to interact with the underwriting team.
Yeah,
We day to day product, we sat right next door to the product guys.
yeah.
So we developed that commerciality, and I would imagine for a lot of actuaries that was the case back then.
Mm.
I don't know what it's like these days. It's been a while since I've been sort of in a pricing team specifically, or valuations and pricings, but yeah. So that level of commerciality really the brings a different lens to sort of working in non-traditional areas. Even just the basics. One of my all-time favorite things about, and I consider myself so lucky, was the fact that when we did evaluation, we had to reconcile the data. The number of organizations that have suffered from failed modeling exercises because the data wasn't complete or correct, based on me having joined organizations and worked in them, is phenomenal. It's one of
Mm.
the biggest reasons that I've seen, technical work fail, was because that one basic thing was not there. And it's something that, you don't learn out, not to my knowledge, it's not really taught outside of
Mm.
actuarial. So,
Mm.
but
Mm.
anyway, that's sort of like why I think, think about the external stuff, the non-traditional stuff as well, if you're looking for a new role. And, the world is your oyster. There's so much happening out there. And organizations are screaming out for really professional people with a great deal of knowledge about the modeling, who have great, technical, when I talk technical, I mean, able to use a variety of tools, are able to learn quickly. So that's one of the things I would say. Think outside the box in terms of where you go to next. Now, that'll suit different people, depending on where you're at in your career. But yeah, think about outside of the box.
Okay, that's really good advice. And so I hadn't thought about the idea of people, getting bots to apply for roles or,
Yeah,
we think about, there's more people, I am hearing that there's lots of people applying for roles and often more junior roles because these senior redundancies are being made. But I hadn't thought about also the impact that technology is having on the recruitment process. And that if people can more easily apply for roles, and I mean, you can do this on LinkedIn, right? There's like easy apply buttons and click here, and it all kind of happens. So I can see why you then potentially have, excess of people applying that may not be a good fit, may have not even really thought it through whether they would be a good fit, but they're just scattergun approaching their job
yeah,
hunting.
yeah. I
So,
think as well, you really need to tailor your CV to the role,
okay,
and that was sort of raised with me by a number of friends. You need to tailor it significantly more than what you used to need.
right.
So one of my friends, I was going for quite a senior role. I sent them my CV, sent them the thing, and said, "Can you just have a look for me?" They read through it, and they came back and said, "You need to cut it by 50%."
50%, wow.
So I had all the technical stuff in there. This role wasn't a hands-on technical role.
Mm, mm.
It was managing technical people,
Yeah,
but they said, "Look, they're looking for someone who can demonstrate all of the management side of things, the soft skills,
yeah,
the stakeholder management." And it's great you're demonstrating all that, but just get rid of half of it, remove half the jobs on there.
right.
Uh, what they want to see is that you've managed teams, you've communicated with people across the organization, not just at the upper echelons,
Mm, mm.
and things like that. And I sort of thought about it and how I would go about that. And that's really tough, trying to cull things down to really
Yeah.
succinct. But then for other roles, they made it very clear they wanted someone who's, in the weeds, for lack of a better way of putting it. So I've got so many different versions of my CV now that range from like 2 pages down up to I don't know, I think 4 or 5. That
Wow.
said, I've got one friend who is a little bit older than me. He's been in financial services, albeit in a slightly different space. He has a 1 page CV,
Okay.
and to be honest, I don't know whether he needs a CV. He's in the space that he works in. Everyone knows him, so
Right.
but
Right.
he goes, here's mine. He gave me his, and he said, this is what I would expect if I was hiring for a data analytics role. He said, maybe a little bit longer, but this is what I would expect. So some of my friends were very open with me. A couple of really fantastic acquaintances and friends sent me their CVs and said, here's something, have a think about, like, what you put in it. This is what I was looking for when I applied for this role. So I've,
Okay.
I've been very lucky. There are a lot of really great people and helpful people out there.
Yep. So, so tailoring your CV and also maybe getting some feedback from others.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
And
yep, go.
the feedback from others, especially people hiring people, and like if you're applying for an actuarial role and you've got a mate who's like in a senior actuarial hiring role, have a chat to them. Say, hey,
Yeah.
here's my CV. They will give you frank and honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the actuaries out there, yeah, sometimes they can be a bit, what's the right word? They're just straight to the point,
Yep.
but it's really good. It's
No
really, really
fluff.
no fluff. Don't be offended by it. Take it
Yep.
on the chin.
Yep.
Learn from
Learn
it.
from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what other advice did other people give you when you were going through
Uh,
this process?
Work my network. So I've worked with a lot of people over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it wasn't about going, hey, have you got a job? Sometimes it's just about catching up with people, letting people know that you're in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just caught up with people for lunch or coffee. Actually, I owe somebody a lunch. I'll need to catch up with them.
Okay.
But it's about working the network, but it's not specifically about going, hey, have you got a job? And that's the thing that I'd emphasize. Sometimes it's just like catching up with people, and like I've always tried to have a good relationship with pretty much everyone that I've worked with over the years, and I
Mm-hmm.
catch up with a variety of people. But it is also about going, hey, if you do hear of anything, let me know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, one of my I call him a reasonably good mate. He was very forthright in going, email this person, this person, this,
Right.
and but he goes, again, don't hit them up for a job. Just go, hey, I'm in the market. If you hear of anything, let me know. Because he's
Yeah.
like, you know, you've been around a long time. You've worked with a lot of people. You're not a numpty.
Yeah.
Maybe not the exact words that he used, but you've got to use what you have at your
Mm.
disposal. So that would be another thing.
Yeah, and I like that point you made, Kevin, about building a network and using a network because I think it comes up a lot. And often when I'm talking to actuaries in my coaching sessions, they're not quite sure how to do that. And so, my advice is always, networking is not just about going to drinks and exchanging business cards. That may be part of it for you, for some people. But, it's about staying in contact with people that you've worked with. It's about building good relationships with the people that you are interacting with, whether that's in your corporate role or your volunteer work, or whether you're doing some work for the institute or, other opportunities to connect with people. There's so many different opportunities to do that. And then you just build on that and just stay in touch with those people.
Yeah, and I do keep in contact with vast majority of my previous managers. Whether I just run into them randomly somewhere and have a bit of.
Mm, mm.
I was in Tasmania earlier in the year, and one of my old bosses, he's down there now, so we caught up. Yeah, we had a couple of drinks, but we chewed the fat over a lot of things.
Yeah,
He was up here for reinsurance related meetings, and so we caught up with the old CRO from one of the companies that we worked
right.
at together. And so,
Yeah.
we just caught up, had a bit of a yarn about the old days,
Yep.
had a bit of a yarn about what we're all doing now,
Yep.
had a bit of a yarn about the industry in general, where we think things are going. Sometimes it can get a little bit, what's the right word? I can't think of the right word, but we'll talk about what's happening in the industry, be it good or bad.
Mm,
So,
mm.
but like having that openness and being able to be frank and open with people
Yeah.
about stuff that's going on, that helps you to develop a network.
Yeah.
There are some people in the industry who are fantastic at networking. Bill, so,
Yeah.
but it's not something that I think comes naturally to a lot of people. So and sometimes I'll be honest, I go and stand in a corner and just watch the room, and be like, oh, I'll go over and have a chat with that person. I might go and have a chat with that person, but I'm naturally probably a massive introvert.
Yeah.
That said, some people have said that I'm a bit of an introvert extrovert.
Okay.
So my moment.
Yeah, I think we learn certain behaviors that serve us, whether we're naturally that way inclined or not. So yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. I need that time to myself to recharge and find a big room of people that I don't know very overwhelming and daunting. So I think it's about finding ways that serve you in your networking and yeah, making it work for you.
Mm.
So so I mean, you've had a lot of experience, as you've alluded to. So, I mean, you would have seen a lot of changes over your career. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing for me that I find is the change in language that people use. So, the classic one is when I first started working, we had a reporting department. They literally ran the old high-speed printer reports, and then, some people would then have to go and type the numbers back into a spreadsheet because there was
Wow.
no.
Yeah.
So that was sort of late '90s and stuff like that. But then, that evolved into, your MIS, your EIS, then it was the BI department, then it was the data mining department. So there's been all these changes in language, and what they do, the technologies they use is for change, but what they're actually doing hasn't really changed that much.
Okay.
As a mathematician, I sit back and I look at the language used around the techniques that we use and how they're classified. And I think back and I look at a lot of stuff and I'm like going, the applications are slightly different. The underlying techniques have existed. Some of them go back a long way. So, back in the old days, we used maths and stats to build pricing models. Then it was machine learning or data mining, and now they classify all of those techniques in with AI, and it's like, well, AI really is it's a machine learning technique. It's based off neural networks, and there are a variety of different types of neural networks. But at the end of the day, their core function is maths and stats.
Mm.
Maths and stats isn't sexy,
Yeah.
but in the words of the AA from one of the companies I worked with recently, it's really just eighth grade maths, a lot of it.
Eighth grade maths. Love it.
But like, and a lot of it is eighth grade. Some of it is more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the key difference, especially that you can bring to an organization, is the interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So, whilst a lot of people can do the math, can
Mm.
they interpret it in the context of that organization? And that's
Mm.
probably one of the big differentiators between a lot of professions.
Yeah.
I see a lot of data and analytics people come out and they're great with tools, they're great with technology, but they're not necessarily great at the interpretation in the context of the business. So they veer away from it until they've developed an understanding of it. What I have noticed is sometimes they don't stay long enough to really develop it in depth.
Right.
People can throw around terminology and slang and whatnot, and I sort of sit back and I go, I like to apply this to pretty much all of the modeling and analytics stuff that I do.
Yep.
I'm like, can you explain it to your nonna? So I used to like trying when I couldn't when I was struggling in my head, I'd try and explain it to my mum.
Yep.
And so my mum, she's getting on in years, and so she went through schools, but she was never a math type person. How do I explain it to someone with a non-technical background? And that's worked really well for me, especially in interviews, getting people to explain in plain English a GLM. That
Mm.
has failed me once.
Okay.
I was interviewing a young man. He had a PhD in math. It was a pricing role, and I asked him to explain in plain English. Oh no, I didn't say plain English. I said, "Can you explain it as though you're explaining it to your mum?"
Yep.
He got up. There's a whiteboard there. He got up there. He starts writing notation.
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
So I stopped him and I said, I said, your mum, and he's like, oh yeah, my mum has, I think she was an associate professor at a university
Okay,
teaching.
so she gets the whiteboard then.
So I lost. But I had to sort of pare him back and go, can you explain it to plain English to
Yeah,
my HR?
yeah.
But it was kind of funny at the time. My boss thought it was hilarious. But you live and learn by these things. But being able to explain things in plain English, I think, is really important.
Mm.
So, and that's one of the things that I think has really changed. I've seen that explanation in plain English. I won't say devolve, but become more jargon driven.
Okay.
People make the assumption that people understand acronyms and jargon, and acronyms are contextual. So I've worked in lots of places. I'm like going, well, that makes no sense. I don't know what that acronym means in this context.
Yeah.
And I remember one time coming out of a meeting with a few of the GMs at the organisation I was at the time, and it was not about analytics. It was about DR, disaster recovery. And my boss pulls me aside and he's like, mate, can you come into a room? We've got no idea what the IT guys were talking about.
Right.
They just spoke in jargon and
All
in words
jargon.
of all jargon. The guys, they're business guys, their claims, GMs of claims and operations and stuff like that. That's not their jam, for lack of a better word. Um, I'm sitting there going, okay, I think I understood what they're on about. But like I had to stop and think and work through and help them to understand it. But I think it's really important to understand that evolving language, and that when we're communicating with different groups have and different understanding. So that's probably one of the biggest changes. Is sort of, we were getting really, really good at explaining in plain English, but then it sort of devolved back to jargon, and it is
Mm.
difficult to understand everything. We're being thrown new technologies at us left, right, and center. How do you explain it? How do we all learn about it really quickly? So that's probably one of the biggest changes, sort of the speed at which things have been changing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that ability to communicate in clear language, or to your mum or to your nonna or to a 4-year-old, is what I often like to say. Could you explain this to a child? Um, Not that what we're doing is childlike or simple, but we should be able to explain the so what of what we're doing. We need to understand our audience, and not all of our audiences are technical. So being able to explain that in a way that makes sense, and fighting that urge to use the jargon, which we might think makes us sound smarter, I think is a pitfall, a common trap.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
feeling
no,
okay to just, yeah, confident to just use the simple language.
yeah.
Yeah. Kevin, it's been great hearing your experience today, your experience of redundancy and coming through, and what you've learnt through that, and some of the useful tips that you've had for other people facing redundancy. I'd like to finish our interview with one question, and it's this. What's your top tip for those navigating redundancy?
Got two. Don't take it personally, and really understand where it is that you want to go next. And then if your network supports that, work the network.
That's fantastic, fantastic advice. Kevin, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great having this conversation, and no doubt your tips and advice will help other people who are also facing redundancy.
Yep. Cool.